Hi, welcome to today's video. This is a subject I feel so strongly about because I used to feel like I was constantly having to fight myself because the problem was in myself. I didn't like who I was and I felt that I could never change, that I would always end up ruining things for myself and that I would always be unhappy. So if you can relate to this, then my heart goes out to you because this is really tricky. And before I jump into the video, before I start talking about anything else, I want to say that it really doesn't have to be this hard. Even if it feels that way now for you, if you feel like everything's a struggle, then just know it doesn't need to be that way. But what really helped me overcome this and actually start to change myself and my life was realizing that this self or part of me that I disliked and I was constantly fighting wasn't necessarily me as a whole, but it was my shadow. Which is why, to explain things in this video, I'm going to be talking about the Jungian shadow. This is a part of the unconscious mind that contains basically all the things you dislike or suppress in yourself. So anything that is in conflict with the image you have in your head of who you want to be falls into your shadow. But the problem with this is that all these things, they never go away, they don't disappear. Instead, your shadow has an unconscious influence over everything that you do, and this will then show up as self-sabotage, insecurities, fear, limiting beliefs, and it impacts your life in all these ways, and you might not even understand why. So whenever you do something that you don't like that you do, it's because of the influence of your shadow. So, what is the shadow? Even Jung can't answer that question, so instead I'm going to show you how it's created and what it looks like. So I'll be using my drawing for this to show you. Ignore the bottom half for now, we'll get to that later. We're just focusing on the top. Imagine this is you, and it has all these little pieces that make up your personality inside of it. And this is what you're born with. Understand, Jung was an essentialist, so he believes that we're not born as a blank slate and everything about who we are is shaped by our experience. Instead, we're already born with all the pieces we need to develop in order to become whole. And these are like the different pieces. So ideally, the goal is to grow up and to have the experience to develop all of them. But what actually happens is as you get older, you learn to adapt to your environment because, especially as a child, you want to fit in, you want to be accepted by people because this is how you're going to survive. So because of this, you start to express these different parts of yourself, and depending on how people react to it, you're going to learn to shape yourself according to this. And what happens is that you start sorting out these pieces of yourself. Now, this is a very simplified explanation, and you basically start sorting this into good and bad. So all the parts of yourself that are maybe met with praise and love and affection, these things you learn are good about yourself, and they make up what later becomes your persona. All the things that are met with criticism and rejection that make you feel like you aren't accepted, you end up rejecting these parts of yourself and suppressing them where they fall into your shadow. So your persona is part of the conscious mind. It's what you're aware of, and the shadow is part of the unconscious mind. Anything that is unconscious can't be controlled or developed, but anything that is conscious can be changed. So this is the big reason why you might struggle to change yourself, because maybe you read a million self-help books and you tried to follow all the steps, all the different systems, all the tricks and hacks to change yourself and change your life, but you still end up falling into the same patterns. You are stuck in a certain way and you don't know why. You don't know how to change yourself because you can't break out of this. And this is often a sign that you're dealing with the unconscious. And the thing is, you cannot change the unconscious. You cannot change anything in it unless you retrieve it and bring it into consciousness. This is where you can start to develop and change these parts of yourself. So now back to the drawing. Between these two, you have the ego. Your ego is the one that makes decisions and choices and ultimately controls your actions. But what's really important is that your ego has the role of mediating between all these other parts of the mind. So it uses your persona, this image you've created of who you think you should be, who you want to be. It uses this as a role model to base its decisions off of. It always wants to make decisions that are in accordance with your persona, but it also has to satisfy the unconscious impulses of your shadow. And you can almost imagine your ego as a big scale that weighs all of these pieces, because even though in the example I just drew 3 little figures here and here, depending on how you grow up, depending on how you learn to shape your personality, you may end up rejecting so much of yourself, or never even realizing and making parts of yourself aware that what's bad, your shadow, significantly outweighs what is good, what you've embraced in your conscious personality. And when this happens, your shadow is going to have a far greater influence over the decisions of your ego than your conscious mind. And this is what leads to self-sabotage. Self-sabotage happens when, get this back, when your conscious motivations and goals that are aligned with who you want to be, what you want to be doing, are in conflict with your unconscious motivations and goals. So whenever these two don't match up, whenever you're acting in a way that you don't like, you don't want to be doing, it's because of the influence of your shadow. You can think of this as the part of yourself you're trying to fight, but instead of trying to force it, instead of beating yourself up for this, you simply need to change the balance, because this is what is driving every one of your decisions you make, whether you're aware of it or not. And how do you do this? You do this by integrating your shadow. In the beginning, I told you how these are like the pieces of your personality you are born with, that you need to develop. All of this together is what makes up the self. This is the total of who you are. It's the most authentic and ideal version of yourself. And if you develop all of these things, this is what your unique potential looks like. So I want to give you an example of what this actually looks like, just to make it a bit more clear, because I feel like a lot of these ideas can be very intangible. And one of my favorite examples I like to use for the shadow is aggression. So first of all, the shadow isn't bad. Although I wrote the word bad here, this is just to make it very simple, because you perceive it as bad, but it isn't actually bad. Instead, it may show up in unproductive and destructive ways, but this is because it's undeveloped. It's in an immature state. So all these parts of yourself, they are initially immature, just like a child. And the way that these qualities mature and are fully developed is through experience. So, for example, let's say one of these pieces is your aggression. And as a child, you don't have much control over this. So you might get angry, you might have a tantrum and yell at your parents, and you are criticized for it. Maybe you're punished for it. And because of this, you learn, oh, if I express my aggression, then I'm not going to be loved by the people taking care of me. And without them, I can't survive. So this is a bad part of my personality. And this doesn't happen consciously, but you end up suppressing it. So from there on, anytime you might have an impulse of your aggression, you're going to push it down. You're going to ignore it, because your persona is to be a good child, to be harmonious and easygoing and maybe the peacemaker, and your aggression is in conflict with that goal that you have, which is why it's suppressed. It falls into your shadow. But because of this, you never get to develop it. What happens is, as you get older, When you're in situations where your aggression is triggered, maybe something makes you upset, maybe someone pushes your boundaries, then two things tend to happen. The first is you're not able to use it. You're not able to actively use it, at least not in a controlled way, because it's been suppressed. So you will let people walk all over you. You don't know how to express your anger, your needs. And this will start to have so many bad effects on you in your life because you allow things to happen that shouldn't. And you start to view yourself as weak and passive and incapable. And it's all because you're suppressing your aggression yourself in order to be liked and to fit in. Not only will suppressing your aggression make you feel weak because you can't use it when you need to, but it will also start to have a negative unconscious influence over you. Because, like I said, your shadow still sends its impulses to your ego, and the more you've suppressed, the stronger its influence will become. So even though you can't use your aggression in healthy ways, you may start to become passive-aggressive or resentful. You may start to have your anger build up inside of you, and what can even happen is that if a lot of these pieces cluster together, they can even form shadow complexes, which are like an autonomous part of the psyche, and they can completely overrule your ego's decisions. And this is what you see in people when they sometimes just snap. They completely act against their persona or their usual ways that they behave. And it's because they've suppressed so much of themselves, which has been triggered by something specific, that it comes out in very destructive and uncontrolled ways. And maybe this is something you've even noticed in yourself. I know I used to really struggle with anxiety, and looking back, I can very much see how it was different parts of myself that were in conflict with one another. I was suppressing so much which was important and wanted to be seen and wanted to come up, and because I was constantly trying to fight this back, it started to have more and more power over me. With things like this, you can really see the kind of tension that this creates in your mind, because this is what it is that you feel like you're fighting. You want to be your persona. You want to do all the things you think you should or will make you a great person, but anytime you can't or you struggle to, it's because of the shadow's influence. So to integrate your shadow means retrieving these pieces and learning to develop them, allowing them to mature and to become an integral part of your personality, a part of your conscious personality. The way you do this is through a lot of practice and experience. You need to be able to forgive yourself for mistakes, because you have to expect you're going to make mistakes, especially when this part of yourself is immature. It's not fully controlled or developed yet. And what you need to develop it is a lot of positive experience. And this is now a part of shadow work, which I've also done a whole video on. I'll put it in the description. You can check it out if you want. But shadow work is the process of integrating these suppressed parts of your personality, these parts of your shadow, and developing them to become your strengths, something you can use and control, and that will help you actually live towards your full potential. So if we keep using aggression as an example, this is something that in an undeveloped state can be very unproductive, and that's probably why you learn to suppress it in the first place. But it's only that way because it's undeveloped. Aggression, if developed and matured, can look like confidence, healthy assertiveness, feeling capable. All of these things that are so important for you to be able to live your best life, to be more controlled in your actions and decisions. You can learn to develop your aggression bit for bit. And this really looks like writing out a bunch of tiny steps and maybe doing things like expressing that you're upset or unhappy about something. a few times to someone you trust and you're comfortable with. And this may feel really uncomfortable, and you may be really bad at it as well, especially because there's such a charge to it in your shadow. It may feel very triggering, but you need to do it anyway, just so that you can realize that, first of all, it's okay, because you're no longer dependent on other people liking you and accepting you to be able to live. Instead, you need to focus on becoming independent and doing what's best for you. Because you've suppressed your aggression, you may have so many fears and insecurities that are all tied up with it, but only by confronting them can you actually let that go. Otherwise, it's going to keep holding you back. So you need to practice, for example, expressing your anger and realizing that it's not the end of the world, that it's okay. Maybe it actually benefits you because now you've expressed a need or a boundary, and this improves your life. You can meet that need directly and intentionally, and no longer unconsciously in unproductive ways like you would when it's still part of your shadow. Maybe you can also practice standing up for yourself or expressing an opinion, even if you know that others don't agree with it. It's all these little things, especially the things that feel uncomfortable and maybe bad to you. This is what you need to practice doing. So you can learn it's okay, and you can also get better at it. The more you do this, like a child, you will make mistakes and you will learn how to do it properly. This is how this part of yourself will mature. And eventually, if you've done it so much that you're confident in it, you have a lot of positive experience, and you've been able to confront and let go a lot of these fears and insecurities that are wrapped up around it, then this will become a strength, a core part of your personality that you'll be able to use in order to reach your goals. You won't feel like you're missing this in order to be capable, or have it be unconsciously influencing you and driving you to self-sabotage. Instead, it will be fully developed and in your control. And this is just one example, but you can do this with anything, really. You can learn to recognize your shadow and bit for bit practice developing these parts of you. This can be things like your self-trust, or something I've been working on recently is to trust my own judgment, because I realized that this is a pretty big part of my shadow, which I wasn't aware of until it was suddenly triggered, and I felt awful for about a week. I didn't know why, and then I realized that I have all of these fears and limiting beliefs and strong suppressed emotions wrapped up around my own judgment. And this is also something that I didn't have much experience or practice in, so it was very weak. It was making me self-sabotage in so many ways, and it was a big insecurity of mine because this was an area where I would just feel incapable. I wouldn't feel good enough. I wouldn't feel strong enough, and it had a very negative impact on my self-image as well. So as soon as I realized this, I did some journaling and shadow work, and I realized that this is at the core of all of these problems and patterns that I've been having, and I decided this is what I need to develop. So I really wrote down a list of things I can do and steps I can take, ranging from easiest to hardest, so that I can start to develop my own judgment. And again, accept that mistakes will come with that, accept that it won't be perfect, but only through practice will it get to that point where it's good enough and I can use this in a positive and productive way. So this is more or less what the process looks like for all these different things. Laziness, jealousy even, these are all negative qualities because they're undeveloped. But if you develop them, they will turn into your strengths. Jealousy can turn into inspiration. It's all the same thing. It just depends on how mature these parts of your personality are. Also, self-trust is a big one. I think a lot of people have a problem with their self-trust. And this is something I've really been working on. Self-trust is the foundation of discipline. If you don't trust you're going to do what you say you will, then you're not going to do it, no matter how hard you try or try to push yourself. For example, last night I decided I would go for a run today, but as soon as I woke up, my alarm went off. I initially sat right up, was ready to get out of bed, and then as soon as my brain woke up, I started thinking and looking around. I looked outside the window and I thought, oh, it's such a rainy day today. Maybe it's not a good day to go for a run. You know, maybe I might slip or I'll get my shoes muddy. It's probably not a good idea. I thought instead I can just do a home workout. It's just as good. Or what difference does it really make if I go for a run today or not? All these thoughts started coming into my head and suddenly made it really hard to get up and still go for a run like I wanted to. But the thing is, these are all excuses, and this is actually, get the drawing back, this is actually a great way to explain the relationship between these three here. So your ego tries to mediate between the different impulses in the psyche. And it will always try to make a decision that pleases your persona. Your persona is who you want to be, what you want to do, what you think is right. But the thing is, it will still try to please the impulses of your shadow. So in an example like this, a lot of these excuses, I like to call them cover stories because they're what your ego comes up with to satisfy both of these impulses. They're always a reaction of your shadow, but they're spun in a way that seems like it's based in reality. It seems like it fits in with the goals and intentions of your persona. For example, the thought I had with it being too rainy outside, so I can't go for a run because I'll get my running shoes dirty. That's completely ridiculous if you think about it, but it makes sense because it fits in with the persona, who you want to be. You can still feel like you're acting in accordance with this while still listening to the impulse of your shadow, which might be fear, laziness, or you just don't really think you're gonna do it. And I found the best way to deal with these kind of excuses that your ego is going to come up with in plenty is by just trying not to think. So as soon as you start entertaining this, it can become really tricky because this is where you start to self-sabotage. Instead, you just cannot let yourself think about it and just do it. And this is where self-trust comes in. So I was so susceptible to these excuses because perhaps my self-trust wasn't very strong. Because it's tricky if you don't trust your own word. Imagine you have a friend and this friend always breaks their promises, never does what they say they're gonna do. They always arrive late and you just can't rely on them at all. You're not going to trust them. And this is exactly how it is with yourself. The relationship you have to yourself is so important when practicing shadow work because when you're developing these inferior parts of your personality, it's going to be uncomfortable and it's going to be hard. So you need to trust that you will be able to handle it. So how do you start to develop your self-trust? Just the same as with these other traits. You do it bit for bit and you try to build up the positive experience that will then change your beliefs. You want to build it up until it becomes a part of your identity, until it's fully integrated, because this is then when you can use it. It's conscious, it's in your control, because a lack of self-trust is always going to make you self-sabotage. It will always make life harder than it needs to be. So to sum this part up, whenever you feel like you are self-sabotaging and getting in your own way and acting against your own interest, understand that what this really is the influence of your unconscious shadow. That is what you're up against. That's what you're trying to fight. And the reason you can't seem to change is because it's a part of your unconsciousness. The way you can change it is first by bringing it into your consciousness and they're developing it, because a lot of these times these things aren't just bad, but they're inferior, they're undeveloped. And just like aggression, something that can show up in a very unproductive and destructive way can become a great strength of yours once it's fully developed. That is essentially the goal of shadow work. So where do you start? How do you identify what you need to integrate and develop if it's a part of your unconscious? A very simple way to do this is by asking yourself, what do you do that you don't like that you do? You can even think of a vision of your ideal self or your ideal life for this and start looking for discrepancies between the two. Where are you acting against your best interests? Where are you self-sabotaging? Where do you hold limiting beliefs? What are your insecurities and fears? If you dig into all these things, you will find parts of your shadow. Now, I mentioned beliefs, which is really important because a lot of Jung's ideas around this were inspired by William James's concept of cash value. This is something I was reading about recently, which I found really interesting because it puts a lot of these things into words and makes it easier to think about. So cash value describes how our beliefs shape our immediate experience in the world. So your beliefs impact the way you experience life, and this can be in a more positive or a more negative way. For example, if you believe that you can fly, it might have the immediate impact that you will try to jump off a roof and fly, which is a very bad thing. However, if you believe that you are capable and can overcome any challenge no matter what, then that might have a very positive impact on your life, because the immediate impact is that you will not shy away from challenges. You will seek out the difficult things and you will give it your best to do it because you believe that you are capable of this. So, for example, you have your identity. Let's use laziness as an example for this. If part of your identity is I am a lazy person, then this is going to have an impact on your beliefs. You might then hold the belief, I can never finish a project. And then your belief is what will influence your actions. The impact this will have on your choices and your life is that you will give up on things easily. You won't even try. You'll avoid difficult or bigger projects. And then this will influence the experiences you have. You'll be lacking in positive experiences. All your experiences will be that of failure, and this just goes to reaffirm your identity of being a lazy person. This is just like how when I was talking about aggression earlier and how suppressing it can have a very negative impact on your self-image. This is why. It's because you're missing these things that the way you view yourself becomes very imbalanced, and it has this trickle-down effect where it starts to impact all areas of your life. So if you've suppressed your aggression, then you're going to see yourself as weak. You're going to think of yourself as someone who's weak because you are. And it's because you suppress what you really think, what you really feel. You don't stand up for yourself. And then when you look in the mirror, you're going to stand there and think, why am I so weak? Why am I so passive? Why can't I stand up for myself? Why can't I change anything in my life? Why do I feel this way? But understand that this isn't who you are. It's only a result of this. And shadow work is what can help you change this balance so that you can feel more in control of yourself, so that you can actually change yourself. You have all of the pieces in you to be strong. They just need to be developed. That's why you can't use them, because they're unconscious. They can't be controlled and they only show up in unproductive ways. You have all of the pieces in you to realize your fullest potential. You are not weak or broken just because you can't use them, because you don't see it in you. Maybe it's only because so much of yourself and your strengths and your talents has been suppressed or never fully realized in the first place, and it's stuck in your shadow. This is why you're stuck, because this is what you can't control. But changing this balance and changing yourself as a result of it is a process, and it's something you have to start small with. It's a journey. It takes time and practice, and you need to collect enough positive experience in order to develop these parts of yourself so that they become a strong part of your personality, a part of your identity. And once you do this, all these things you're struggling with now will become easier, because it doesn't have to be this hard. The reason it's so hard is because you're stuck fighting so much of yourself in order to do anything you want to do or have to do. So even though this might sound like a lot, I promise you, everything I've talked about is going to be much easier for you in the long run than continuing doing what you're doing now. So I hope this helps. I've also done videos on shadow work and self-concept. They both expand on a lot of the things I was talking about in this video, so feel free to check those out. I'll link them in the description. And thank you so much for watching. I'd love to hear what you think, if this is something you're already familiar with, if you've practiced shadow work before, or have any questions, let me know, and I'll see you next week. Bye!